So hello and welcome to the first day of Brontë Week. Today I'm going to be talking about Charlotte Bronte's The Professor. The Professor, Chapter 1, Introductory. The other day, in looking over my papers, I found in my desk the following copy of a letter sent by me a year since to an old school acquaintance. Dear Charles, I think when you and I were at Eton together, we were neither of us what could be called popular characters. You were a sarcastic, observant, shrewd, cold-blooded creature. My own portrait I will not attempt to draw, but I cannot recollect that it was a strikingly attractive one. Can you? So yes, I am beginning the Brontë week with my least favourite Brontë novel, which is The Professor. I should say that although this is going down as my least favourite, I do still really love it. I think it has many, many good points, but there is one kind of major reason why it is not my favourite, which I will go on to talk about later, which is less about The Professor than about other Brontë novels, if that makes sense. The Professor is by Charlotte Brontë and was her first work. She wrote it when she was quite young, before Jane Eyre, but it wasn't published until after her death. It's also a very short novel. It's more of a novella, really, like in this collection, which is quite slim, as you can see, and quite short. It has quite a lot of Brontë poetry as well. And The Professor is really not very long. I think normally it's only sort of between 100 and 200 pages. And The Professor tells the story of a man called William Crimsworth, who is the narrator of The Professor. And William Crimsworth, after graduating from school, has a bit of trouble. He goes to the north to try and work for his brother, who is a manufacturer, and to try and help him as a clerk, but him and his brother don't get on very well, and Mr. Crimsworth really doesn't do very well in this. So William decides to give up manufacturing and move instead to Belgium to become a professor, to become an English teacher at a school. And the book kind of follows his adventures and his interactions with various people in the town where he settles. And there are kind of two central female figures in this book as well. There is a woman who is the schoolmistress of the school next door, and then there is a teacher at the school next door who he kind of tries to help with her languages and that sort of thing. There are many things that I really love about The Professor. I really love the setting. As always, I love Charlotte Bronte's writing. I think she has a beautiful, rich writing style, and she does characters and characterization just so well. Like, you really get the sense of people, and I love that her characters are not that conventional. Like William Crimsworth as a narrator, as a character, he's not always like that nice, and at times he's a bit odd and kind of eccentric, but you still kind of warm to him in a really interesting way. I like that he's not a kind of conventional romantic hero at all, as many of Charlotte Bronte's heroes are not. I like that he is something more and different to that. And again, I like the other characters in it as well. I think there are a lot of interesting people, and no one is ever like simply nice, and the relationships between all the characters are kind of complicated, but it still is like a joy to read and is a really, really enjoyable one. Another thing I love in The Professor is the way it explores the theme of work. Now, work as a theme is something that comes up in a lot of Victorian novels, and it's something that I really love because I find it really fascinating. And there is this kind of idealization of work in the 19th century like never before, where the ideal class stops being the aristocracy and becomes the middle class, the kind of hard-working middle class. And this idea of middle class respectability coming through working hard becomes a really important idea in a lot of Victorian novels. And I love the way it's dealt with in The Professor, because we have the exploration both of what it means to be a man and to work hard, and also what it means to be a woman and work hard. And we have a lot of women who are teachers and work really hard. We also have at one point in this book a woman who insists on still going on teaching and still working after her marriage, which is just like so cool for the 19th century. It's just, yeah, that kind of stuff always makes me happy in 19th century novels. Go Charlotte Brontë. I love the way the theme of work is explored in The Professor, and these ideas of kind of respectability, what it means to be respectable. The morality of respectability in Charlotte Bronte's The Professor is not about like your class background or where you come from or who your parents were or your money. It's about kind of hard work and honesty and that kind of thing as a kind of culture in the Victorian period I find really interesting. So that's something that I really do love about The Professor. I also think it's quite a nice, like, not a starting place exactly. I think if you're going to start anywhere with the Brontë, start with Jane Eyre, especially if you want to start Charlotte Brontë. But I think The Professor is quite a nice, kind of easier read just because it is quite a bit shorter. As I said, I think it is a really lovely, beautiful book, and really like nicely and tenderly written, with like a beautiful little love story at one point in the book, which makes me very happy, as Charlotte Bronte's love stories always do. So yes, many reasons why I love The Professor. But it is, as I said, my least favourite Brontë novel, and there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that I find the pacing of The Professor quite odd. It takes quite a while to get into like the main story in Belgium, and I do find this actually with quite a lot of Charlotte Bronte's novels. I love her work a great deal, but often it feels like you don't get into the main story until a third of the way through, which I don't mind. Like, sometimes I quite enjoy that, and there are certain things like, you know, in Jane Eyre's childhood is very significant, even if it does mean it takes you a while to get into what is the main plot. And again, the same with like the childhood pieces in Villette. With the novel Shirley, it takes you about a third of the book to get introduced to the character of Shirley, who is the title character. I do often find that in Charlotte Bronte's works, that it takes like a certain amount to get into what feels like the important stuff in the book, and I find that especially with The Professor, because it's such a short book, quite a lot of text space, as it were, happens while William is still in Britain before he moves to Belgium, and it feels like that shouldn't be the case. It feels like plot-wise that doesn't quite make sense for that section of the narrative to take up quite so much space in the book. That's one thing. The other thing, I think the main reason why it's not higher up there is because everything that the Professor does and explores that is brilliant is explored 10 times as well in Villette. I will talk about Villette much later on in the week, and Villette is also about an English person who goes to teach English in a foreign school. The narrator of Villette is a woman rather than a man who goes to Belgium to teach. They explore a lot of very similar themes of kind of solitude, of identity, of what it means to be living somewhere that you don't know, to be a stranger in a new place. And they also explore a lot of very similar themes of kind of teaching, of interactions with pupils and students, and, you know, a lot of the same themes of work and that kind of thing. But Villette is a much longer novel, a much more developed novel, more complex novel with more complex characters and a lot more kind of internal psychology. So even though I really love The Professor for me feels like a rehearsal for Villette. A very good rehearsal, but it's not as good as Villette. And I think certainly you can tell in Villette, which was written quite a while after The Professor, that a lot of the themes and some of the kind of plot structures and a few of the characters even from The Professor, or very similar characters, turn up in Villette, and I think Villette is done so much better that I think that probably reflects on my opinion of The Professor. So there we go. I do really love The Professor. I think it is a great novel, really definitely worth a read if you like the Brontes or Charlotte Brontë, but in my opinion, I think I would think highly of it if Villette didn't exist, because I think you can see in Villette that there are so many things that Charlotte Brontë is trying to do in The Professor that she doesn't quite get, and she absolutely gets perfectly in Villette. So there we go. I do like The Professor, but it is not my favourite Brontë novel. That is about all I have to say for today. I'll be back tomorrow talking about another Brontë book.